The air at the Sterling-Rossi wedding tasted of money, old new, and oceans of it. Lilies imported from Dutch glasshouses fought a losing battle against the cloying scent of 1,000 competing perfumes. Isabella Rossi, 7 months pregnant and radiant, in a gown that cost more than a suburban house, felt a single cold drop of sweat trace its way down her spine. Her fiancé, Richard Sterling, the man who was supposed to be waiting for her at the end of the aisle, was missing, and in the pit of her stomach, where their child kicked softly, a primal instinct screamed that this was no simple case of cold feet. She was about to discover a betrayal so profound it would not only shatter her heart, but threaten to bring 2 corporate empires crashing to the ground. The union of Isabella Rossi and Richard Sterling was less a romance and more a coronation. It was the merger of 2 dynasties, a meticulously planned corporate maneuver, wrapped in the fairy tale trappings of a high society wedding. The Rossis, with Isabella at the helm of their marketing division, commanded a global luxury goods empire. Rossi lifestyle, built on Italian craftsmanship and timeless elegance. The Sterlings, a colder, sharper dynasty of American finance, were led by Richard's formidable mother, Victoria Sterling. Their firm Sterling Holdings had its tendrils in every corner of the global market. The marriage was the final seal on a multi-billion-dollar merger agreement, a pact that would create a conglomerate of unparalleled power, Sterling-Rossi Global. To the outside world, Isabella and Richard were the perfect couple. She was the warm, creative heart. He was the charming, ambitious face of new money. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of paparazzi flashes, charity galas, and weekend trips to Monaco on the Sterling private jet. Richard had courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that left gossip columnists breathless. He'd once filled her Milan apartment with 1,000 white orchids, her favorite simply because she'd had a stressful week. He'd written her name in the sky over the Hamptons. He was attentive, devoted, and seemed utterly captivated by her. But a gilded cage is still a cage. Isabella's brother, Leo Rossi, never trusted him. Leo, 2 years her senior, was the stoic, watchful CEO of the Rossi empire. He had the soul of an old-world craftsman and the mind of a shark. "He performs for you, Bella," he'd told her a month before the wedding, his voice low and serious over a glass of Barolo in his study. "No one is that perfect. He's playing a role, and you need to figure out what his script is." Isabella had dismissed it as brotherly overprotectiveness. "You see everyone as a business opponent, Leo. He loves me, and I love him." Her love was genuine. She saw past the polished Sterling veneer to a man she believed was simply trying to live up to the impossible expectations of his mother. Victoria Sterling was a woman carved from ice and ambition. She viewed emotion as a liability and affection as a currency to be dispensed sparingly and strategically. She approved of Isabella not as a daughter-in-law, but as a priceless asset. The pregnancy, which they had announced 3 months prior, had only increased Isabella's value in Victoria's cold calculus. A male heir would solidify the dynasty. The wedding preparations had been a military-grade operation orchestrated by Victoria. The venue was a historic Long Island estate, its sprawling lawns rolling down to the calm, grey waters of the Sound. The guest list was a who's who of global finance, European aristocracy, and Hollywood royalty. Every detail was curated to scream power. The champagne was vintage, the orchestra was from Vienna, and the 5-tier wedding cake was a confectionery marvel flown in from Paris. The week leading up to the ceremony, had been a blur of contractual meetings disguised as family dinners. Lawyers outnumbered cousins. The talk was of stock options, board seats, and brand synergy. Richard, usually so attentive, had become distant, his phone a permanent fixture in his hand. He'd wave away her concerns with a dazzling smile. "Just last-minute merger madness, my love. The price of building our empire. After Saturday, it's just you, me, and the little one. I promise." He had a best man, Marcus Thorne, who was also a senior VP at Sterling Holdings. Marcus was slick and obsequious, always laughing a little too loudly at Richard's jokes, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Isabella found him unnerving. He had a way of looking at her, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Resentment, perhaps, or a predatory hunger that was deeply unsettling. She'd mentioned it to Richard once, who had simply laughed it off. "Marcus, he's harmless, a bit of a suck-up, but he's been my right hand for years. Don't you worry your beautiful head about him." On the morning of the wedding, the bride's suite at the estate was a flurry of activity. Her mother, Sophia Rossi, a woman whose warmth was a direct contrast to Victoria's frost, was fussing with the lace on her veil. Her bridesmaids, a giggling trio of her oldest friends from university, were sipping champagne. But Isabella couldn't shake a deep, gnawing anxiety. She hadn't seen Richard that morning. He had stayed at a nearby hotel with Marcus, as per tradition, but he had promised to come to her suite for a private moment before the chaos began, just the two of them. He was an hour late. She'd called him twice. The first time it went straight to voicemail. The second time he'd answered his voice breathless and rushed. "Sorry, darling. Got held up. Marcus needed me for something. A little best man crisis. I'm on my way now. I love you." But there was a noise in the background, a faint feminine giggle. Before she could ask, he'd hung up. "Everything all right, Cara?" her mother asked, her gentle hands stilling on her shoulders. Isabella forced a smile. "Fine, Mama. Just nerves." But it wasn't nerves. It was a splinter of doubt lodged deep in her heart that was beginning to fester. She walked to the grand window of the suite, which overlooked the perfectly manicured gardens where hundreds of guests were already beginning to gather. She saw Victoria Sterling holding court near the grand floral arch, a triumphant queen surveying her kingdom. She saw Leo standing apart, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight as he stared toward the main house. Their child chose that moment to give a strong, decisive kick. Isabella placed a hand on her stomach, a silent promise running through her. "I will protect you, always." The words were a vow, though she did not yet know the war she was about to declare. The drop of sweat completed its journey down her back, and the fairy tale began to curdle. The stage was set, the audience was waiting, but the leading man had gone off script, and Isabella was about to become the director of an entirely different kind of show. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each one taut with an unspoken tension that began to suffocate the joyous atmosphere of the bride's suite. The laughter of her bridesmaids became forced. The bubbles in their champagne seemed to die with a fizz of anxiety. Isabella's phone remained silent on the antique vanity, a sleek black mirror reflecting her perfectly made-up face, a mask of serene beauty that was beginning to crack at the edges. "He'll be here," her friend Jessica said, a little too brightly. "You know what grooms are like. Probably lost his cufflinks or something." But Isabella knew Richard. He was meticulously organized, a trait hammered into him by his mother. He didn't lose things. He didn't run late for appointments of this magnitude, not unless he was distracted. The wedding planner, a severe woman named Ms. Albright with a headset permanently attached, to her ear, appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Miss Rossi. Your father is waiting downstairs. The guests are seated." Her eyes darted around the room, noting the absence of the groom. A flicker of professional panic crossed her face before being ruthlessly suppressed. "He was supposed to be here," Isabella said, her voice quiet. "I'm sure he's on his way to the altar." Miss Albright chirped, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Shall we?" Isabella took a deep breath, the boning of her custom-made gown feeling suddenly like a straitjacket. "I need a moment. Please. Just tell my father 2 more minutes." As soon as the door clicked shut, she looked at her brother's number and pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "Where is he, Leo?" she asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Leo's voice was grim. "I don't know. Marcus is out there by the archway, looking like the cat that swallowed the canary. He told me Richard was composing himself. Victoria is starting to look murderous, and not in her usual way." A new wave of nausea washed over her, this one having nothing to do with her pregnancy. "Leo, he called an hour ago. He said he was with Marcus. I heard a girl laugh." Silence on the other end of the line. When Leo finally spoke, all traces of forced calm were gone. His voice was cold steel. "Where are you, Bella?" "In the suite. They want me to start walking." "Don't move," he commanded. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming up. Something is wrong." The call ended. Isabella stood frozen in the middle of the opulent room. Her friends watched her, their earlier cheerfulness replaced by a shared silent dread. The scent of lilies was now overwhelming funereal. It was the scent of decay. She had to know. "I need some air," she announced, her voice surprisingly steady. She began walking toward the door, her heavy train whispering behind her. "Bella, wait," her mother cried out. "Your dress! You can't go out there!" But Isabella didn't stop. She moved with a purpose that scattered her entourage like birds. She swept past Miss Albright in the hallway, ignoring her frantic protests. She ignored the confused looks from caterers and staff. Her instincts were a roaring fire in her gut, guiding her steps, pulling her not towards the garden, not towards the ceremony, but in the opposite direction, down a secluded corridor that led to the estate's private wing. The library, the billiards room, and a series of small private studies reserved for the estate's owners. It was a part of the house the guests were not meant to see. The air here was still and cool. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps. She passed the grand library, its doors firmly shut. She passed the billiards room. And then she saw it. At the end of the hall, the door to the smallest study, the one with the old mahogany desk and the view of the secluded woods, was slightly ajar. A sliver of light cut across the dark hallway, and from within she heard a sound that would be seared into her memory forever. It wasn't a giggle this time. It was a soft, breathy moan. Her blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her hand, clutching the bouquet of white peonies and roses, began to tremble violently. The baby inside her was still, as if sensing the impending shockwave. This was a dream, a nightmare. It had to be. In a moment, she would wake up in her bed, and Richard would be there, and this horrible, suffocating feeling would be gone. Then she heard his voice, low and husky, a voice she knew better than her own. "We don't have much time." He said his words punctuated by another soft, feminine sound. Anger, white hot and volcanic, erupted through the ice of her shock. It propelled her forward. Her trembling stopped. Her hand was steady. She didn't throw the door open. She pushed it slowly, silently. The scene that greeted her was a tableau of obscene betrayal. It wasn't a quick, stolen kiss. It was far, far worse. Her Richard, was there, his perfectly tailored wedding tuxedo jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck, and his shirt was unbuttoned, revealing his chest. He was leaning against the large mahogany desk, and in his arms, her body pressed against his, was a woman. Isabella recognized her instantly. It was Scarlett Dubois, a junior analyst from Sterling Holdings, a pretty brunette with ambitious eyes whom Richard had once dismissed as eager but harmless. Scarlett's dress, a slinky emerald green number completely inappropriate for a morning wedding, was hiked up high on her thighs. Her hands were tangled in Richard's hair. Her lipstick, a garish shade of crimson, was smeared around her mouth. And on the desk, next to a half-empty glass of what looked like whiskey, sat Richard's phone. They hadn't seen her. They were lost in their sordid little world, just meters away from where their families, their friends, their entire world awaited their union. Isabella didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, terrifying calm washed over her. It was the calm of the eye of a hurricane, a pocket of absolute stillness before total devastation. She took one step into the room. The heel of her shoe clicked on the hardwood floor just inside the doorway. It was the only sound needed. Richard's head snapped up. His eyes widened first in confusion, then in pure, unadulterated horror. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pasty and sick. He shoved Scarlett away from him so abruptly that she stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Bella," he choked out his voice, a strangled whisper. It's not what it looks like." It was the oldest, most pathetic cliché in the book, and it was the spark that lit the fuse. Isabella looked from his panicked face to Scarlett's, who was now staring at her with a mixture of fear and defiance. She looked at his undone shirt, at the smeared lipstick, at the jacket, lying discarded like a promise he'd just thrown away. Then her gaze fell to the phone on the desk. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked away. "Bella, wait. Please." Richard's desperate cry followed her down the hall. She heard him scrambling, fumbling to fix his clothes to chase after her. But just as he reached the hallway, another figure appeared, blocking his path. It was Leo. His face was a mask of thunderous rage. He had seen her face as she emerged from the corridor, and he had understood everything in an instant. "You are not taking one more step toward my sister." Leo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He placed a firm hand on Richard's chest, stopping him cold. Isabella didn't look back. She kept walking her back straight, her head held high. She walked past the confused staff, past Ms. Albright, who was now babbling into her headset. She walked to the grand staircase where her father, a kind man with a gentle face, was waiting for her, his expression a mixture of pride and confusion. "Isabella, what's wrong? Where have you been?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She looked at her father, the man who had always protected her, and for the first time a single tear escaped and traced a path through her perfect makeup. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "The wedding is off," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the air. She didn't wait for his response. She lifted the microphone from the small podium that had been set up for the officiant. Her hand was rock steady. She walked past the stunned string quartet, past the floral arch, and stood before the hundreds of seated guests. The murmuring crowd fell silent, their faces a sea of confusion. They saw a bride impossibly beautiful standing alone at the altar. They expected a tearful announcement of a delay. They expected an apology. They got a revolution. The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. It was a heavy, breathless void, filled only by the distant cry of a seagull and the rustle of leaves in the sea breeze. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on Isabella, a solitary figure in white against a backdrop of obscene floral abundance. In the front row, Victoria Sterling's face had tightened into a mask of confused displeasure. She started to rise a silent command for Isabella to step down, but a sharp look from Leo, who had now taken a position a few feet to his sister's right, froze her in place. Isabella's knuckles were white where she gripped the microphone. She could feel the baby, a tiny, innocent life, nestled safely inside her. That thought was her anchor. It was her strength. She wasn't just a jilted bride. She was a mother, protecting her child from a legacy of lies before it could even begin. She lifted the microphone to her lips. Her voice, when it came, did not tremble. It was clear, resonant, and carried the cold, hard weight of undeniable truth. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd, deliberately avoiding Richard's family. "I want to thank you all for coming here today to celebrate what was meant to be a joyous occasion." A nervous titter went through the crowd. This was not the expected script. "I have a brief announcement to make," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "There will be no wedding today." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Phones previously tucked away out of politeness began to emerge from pockets and purses. Victoria Sterling was now fully on her feet, her face ashen, her eyes shooting daggers at Isabella. The union between the Rossi and Sterling families, and by extension the merger between our companies, is hereby cancelled, effective immediately. This was no longer a personal drama. It was a corporate bombshell. Murmurs erupted into a low roar. Men in tailored suits began speaking urgently into their phones. The stock market wasn't open on a Saturday, but they knew the bloodbath that would ensue on Monday morning. "Bella, stop this!" Victoria's voice was a sharp, piercing shriek that cut through the noise. "You are hysterical. What is the meaning of this?" Isabella finally turned her eyes to Victoria. There was no fear in her gaze, only a chilling, profound pity. "You should ask your son, Victoria," she said, her voice dropping yet still carrying across the amplified system. "You should ask him what he was doing just a few moments ago in the estate's private study." At that moment, Richard finally appeared at the edge of the garden, skidding to a halt on the manicured grass. He had managed to straighten his clothes, but his face was a wreck of sweat and panic. Marcus Thorne was beside him, whispering frantically in his ear. Scarlett was nowhere to be seen, having evidently made a swift and cowardly exit. "Bella, don't do this," Richard shouted, his voice cracking with desperation as he started to push his way through the stunned guests. "Let's talk about this in private." "In private?" Isabella laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound that held no humor. "You mean like you and your mistress were just minutes before you were supposed to pledge your life to me, to our child?" The word mistress hung in the air, an accusation so vulgar and direct, it shocked the refined crowd into another stunned silence. The word child was a second blow twisting the knife of betrayal. Everyone knew she was pregnant. The crime was now doubled a sin against both a wife and a mother. Her eyes found Richard in the crowd. He froze, his face a mess of guilt and terror. "I believe the woman's name is Scarlett Dubois," Isabella announced, her voice precise and unforgiving. "She's a junior analyst at Sterling Holdings. For those of you on the board, You might want to review your company's policies on fraternization, especially when it involves the CEO-to-be actively cheating on his pregnant fiancée during his own wedding. Every detail was a nail in the coffin. She wasn't just airing dirty laundry. She was meticulously documenting the crime for the whole world to see. She named the woman, her position, the company, the location, the timing. It was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Richard looked utterly broken, exposed. He looked to his mother for help, but Victoria was staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. He had not just embarrassed the family. He had single-handedly torpedoed her life's work, the merger in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. He had proven himself to be exactly what she feared most, a weak, foolish boy ruled by his basest impulses. Isabella's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at her own family. Her father's face was a canvas of shock and dawning rage. Her mother was weeping silently. And Leo was looking at her with an expression of fierce, absolute pride. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "I've got you." She turned back to the crowd. "I apologize for wasting your time," she said, her formal tone returning. "But I believe in transparency, and I will not begin a marriage, a family, or a business partnership based on a foundation of such profound disrespect and deceit." She placed the microphone carefully back on the stand. The silence was broken by the sound of her footsteps on the stone path as she walked back the way she came. It was the most powerful walk of her life. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. She moved with the grace and dignity of a queen abdicating a throne she had just discovered was made of filth. As she reached the archway, she unclasped the sterling diamond, the ridiculously large engagement ring Richard had given her. It felt cold and foreign on her finger. She held it out to Leo as he met her. "See that our lawyers get this back to them," she said, her voice a low murmur, "along with a bill for half of this catastrophe." Leo took the ring, his hand closing over it. "Consider it done." "What now?" "Now," Isabella said, taking her brother's arm and not looking back at the chaos erupting behind them. "We go home, and then we go to war." The fairy tale was over. The carefully constructed facade had been shattered into a million pieces. As the Rossi siblings disappeared into the house, leaving the Sterling Empire to implode in a garden of dying lilies, one thing was clear. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a drama that would make the cancelled wedding look like a minor skirmish in a much larger, more brutal conflict. The sleeping giant of the Rossi family had been awakened, and hell hath no fury like a billionaire heiress scorned. The drive from the Long Island estate back to Isabella's Manhattan penthouse was a study in surreal silence. Leo drove the black Maybach with a focused intensity navigating the traffic as if it were a hostile battleground. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of the city, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The adrenaline of the confrontation had begun to fade, leaving behind a deep, hollow ache that settled in her bones. She wasn't crying. The betrayal felt too vast, too seismic for tears. It was a tectonic shift in the landscape of her life, and she was still surveying the wreckage. Her phone, which she'd left in the bridal suite, had been retrieved by Leo's security detail. When they finally entered the quiet, sun-drenched expanse of her penthouse overlooking South Central Park, her head of security, a stoic ex-Mossad agent named Gabriel, handed it to her. "It hasn't stopped, Miss Rosie," he said, his voice impassive. "We've identified 37 unique numbers from the Sterling family and their associates, and over 200 calls from blocked numbers we assume are media. "Turn it off," Leo commanded. "Bella doesn't need to hear from any of them." "No," Isabella said, her voice surprisingly firm. She took the phone. "I want to see the groveling." She powered it on. The device vibrated violently in her hand as a tsunami of notifications flooded the screen. Voicemails, text messages, missed calls. Most were from Richard. She clicked on the most recent voicemail, putting it on speaker. Richard's voice, thick with manufactured tears and genuine panic, filled the room. "Bella. My God. Bella, I am so sorry. You don't understand. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. She means nothing to me. It was Marcus. He kept pouring me drinks, saying I was nervous. Scarlett was just there. I don't even know how it happened. Please just talk to me. We can fix this. I love you. I love our baby. Don't throw this all away because of one moment of insanity." Isabella listened with a detached curiosity, as if studying a particularly loathsome insect under a microscope. "He blames Marcus. He blames the alcohol. He calls her meaningless. He hasn't taken one shred of responsibility." She observed, her voice clinical. She deleted the voicemail without a second thought. The next was from Victoria. Her tone was not apologetic. It was furious. "Isabella, you have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Whatever foolishness Richard engaged in it was a private matter. To detonate it publicly, to jeopardize a multi-billion-dollar merger out of pure emotional hysterics, is unforgivable. You have proven yourself to be exactly the kind of liability I feared. Call me back when you have decided to act like an adult and salvage this situation, not for Richard's sake, but for the sake of our shareholders." Leo let out a short, harsh laugh. "She's worried about the shareholders, of course. Her son humiliates you in the worst possible way, and her first thought is the stock price." "It's all she knows," Isabella said, deleting Victoria's message as well. She scrolled through the texts. Pathetic apologies from Richard. Demands from his father. Even a bizarrely threatening message from an unknown number that read, "You just made a very powerful enemy, you little bitch." She suspected it was Marcus Thorne. She tossed the phone onto the marble island in her kitchen. "Lawyers," she said to Leo, "get our legal team on a conference call. I want the merger dissolution papers drafted by Monday. I want a press release from Rossi Lifestyle by noon tomorrow, stating our position clearly. I want our PR team to get ahead of this narrative. I am not the hysterical woman. I am the CEO who uncovered a fatal flaw in a potential partner's leadership and acted decisively to protect my company's interests." Leo was already on his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "Done. I'm calling Marco, then Julia from P. What about the personal side?" "Personal side," Isabella repeated the words as if they were from a foreign language. "There is no personal side anymore. He made it business when he cheated with a company employee. He made it business when he risked our family's name. Victoria made it business when she called me a liability to." The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated strategic warfare. While the Sterlings were in panicked damage control, fielding calls from irate board members and trying to spin a narrative of a troubled emotional bride, the Rossi team launched a surgical PR strike. Their press release was a masterpiece of corporate speak, framing the cancelled wedding and merger as a fundamental divergence in corporate ethics and leadership values discovered at a critical juncture. It never mentioned cheating, but the implication was clear. They were the stable, honorable party, extricating themselves from a toxic partner. The media, smelling blood, went into a frenzy. Paparazzi camped outside Isabella's building and the Sterling Holdings headquarters. Gossip sites published grainy photos of Scarlett Dubois fleeing the wedding venue, her face hidden in shame. Her identity, her job, her social media profiles, everything was dug up and put on public display. She became the digital Scarlet woman torn apart by an anonymous online mob. Isabella felt a flicker of pity for her, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Scarlett's defiant smirk in that study. Meanwhile, Leo was dismantling the financial ties that had already begun to bind the two companies. He was ruthless. Joint accounts were frozen. Preliminary integration budgets were clawed back. A penalty clause in the initial merger agreement, one Leo himself had insisted upon covering, breaches of good faith and personal conduct by key principals was invoked. It would cost Sterling Holdings hundreds of millions of dollars. Isabella spent most of her time in her penthouse, a gilded fortress against the storm outside. Her mother Sophia had arrived, bringing with her the scent of home-cooked food and unconditional love. She didn't offer advice or judgment. She simply sat with Isabella, held her hand, and let her be silent when she needed silence and rage when she needed to rage. The rage came on the third day. Isabella was standing in the nursery she had so lovingly designed. It was a serene space of soft creams and gentle greys, with a hand-painted mural of a whimsical forest on one wall. A tiny crib stood assembled in the corner. She ran her hand over the smooth wood, and suddenly the full weight of her loss crashed down on her. It wasn't just the loss of a husband, but the loss of a dream of the family she thought she was building for her child. She let out a guttural sob, a sound of pure animal pain. And then she began to dismantle the room. She didn't break anything. Her actions were deliberate, methodical. She folded the tiny clothes and placed them back in their boxes. She took down the mobile of soft, felted stars. She pushed the crib against the wall. She was erasing Richard, erasing the future they were supposed to have, clearing the space for a new one she would have to build alone. Later that evening, Leo came to her apartment. He found her in the now barren nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the blank space where the crib had been. "The market's open today," he said, softly, leaning against the doorframe. Isabella didn't turn. "How bad was it?" "Worse than we thought." "For them," Leo clarified. Sterling Holdings dropped 17% at the opening bell. The financial press is calling it the Sterling implosion. Our stock, on the other hand, is up 3%. The narrative is holding we're seen as the strong, stable ones who dodged a bullet. A grim satisfaction settled over her. "Good. There's more," Leo said, his tone shifting. "Something's not right. The penalty clause I invoked. Sterling's lawyers are fighting it, which is expected, but their arguments are weak, almost distracted. And I've been looking at some of the preliminary financial data we shared during the due diligence phase. There are anomalies." This caught Isabella's attention. She turned to look at her brother. "What kind of anomalies?" "Small things. Discrepancies in growth projections for certain offshore assets. A few encrypted data packets that our tech team flagged as unusual during the transfer. At the time, we chalked it up to Sterling's sloppy data management. But now, I don't know. It feels different." He walked further into the room. "Think about it, Bella. The affair was stupid. It was arrogant. But the timing, on the morning of the wedding at the venue itself, it's almost too perfect, too self-destructive. Richard is weak and entitled, but is he suicidal? A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through Isabella's grief. Leo was right. The sheer brazen stupidity of Richard's actions was hard to reconcile. It was a level of recklessness that bordered on the theatrical. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm suggesting," Leo said, his eyes narrowing, "that maybe the affair wasn't the main event. Maybe it was a distraction, a smokescreen designed to cause exactly this kind of chaos. The question is, what was it meant to hide? The world, which had just been shattered, shifted again. Isabella had thought she was at the center of a drama about love and betrayal, but the cold dread creeping into her heart suggested she had been a pawn in an entirely different game, one with stakes that might be far higher than a broken heart and a cancelled wedding. The unraveling, she realized, had only just begun. The seed of doubt Leo had planted grew into a thicket of suspicion in Isabella's mind. For the next 2 weeks, while the world feasted on the scraps of her personal drama, she and her brother initiated a covert operation. They assembled a small, trusted team, Marco, their head of legal, Julia, their PR chief, a forensic accountant named Anya Sharma, who had a reputation for finding needles in digital haystacks, and Gabriel, their head of security, who was tasked with digging into the lives of Richard Marcus Thorne and Scarlett Dubois. Isabella worked from her penthouse, which had been transformed into a war room. The large dining table was covered in laptops, financial reports, and timelines. The grief was still there, a constant, dull ache, but it was now overlaid with a cold, energizing fury. She had been played. Her pain, her humiliation, her child's future, it had all been collateral damage in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Now she wanted to know the rules, and she wanted to burn the whole game board to the ground. Anya Sharma struck first. "The anomalies Leo flagged are real," she announced during a late-night conference call, her voice crisp and excited. "During the due diligence data transfer, Sterling Holdings sent us several large encrypted archive files containing their projections and asset valuations. Standard procedure. But buried within 3 of those archives were ghost protocols, essentially hidden programs that ran in the background while our servers were analyzing the data." "What did the programs do?" Isabella asked, leaning forward, her coffee forgotten. "They didn't steal anything," Anya said. "That would have triggered alarms. They did something much smarter. They made micro-alterations to our own predictive models. Tiny, insignificant changes to algorithm variables that over time would have skewed our valuation of their assets, specifically their new tech and derivatives divisions, making them appear more stable and profitable than they actually were." Leo swore softly in Italian. "So they weren't just showing us fake numbers. They were hacking us to make us believe their fake numbers were our own idea." "Exactly," Anya confirmed. "It's brilliant and terrifyingly subtle. The financial discrepancy would have been a rounding error at first, but post-merger it would have become a black hole. Sterling Rossi Global would have been carrying billions in toxic, overvalued assets from their side of the ledger. Within a year or 2 it would have triggered a catastrophic devaluation." "A corporate Trojan horse," Isabella whispered, the pieces beginning to click into place. "Victoria would never sanction that. She's ruthless, but she's not stupid. A collapse like that would destroy the Sterling name forever. Which means someone else at Sterling Holdings was running this play." Leo concluded, his voice grim. "Someone who stood to gain from the chaos." The spotlight fell squarely on 2 people, Richard and Marcus Thorne. At the same time, Gabriel's report landed on Isabella's desk. It was a deep dive into the lives of her ex-fiancé and his best man. Richard's profile was predictable, a history of lavish spending, a string of short-term relationships with models and actresses, and a deep-seated psychological need for his mother's approval. But Marcus Thorne's profile was far more interesting. On the surface, he was the loyal number 2. But Gabriel's team had dug deeper. Marcus came from a family that had been rivals with the Sterlings 2 generations ago, before his own family's fortune had collapsed. He had joined Sterling Holdings with a chip on his shoulder, working his way up while living in Richard's shadow. Gabriel had also uncovered a series of encrypted communications and offshore bank transfers. Marcus was living far beyond his declared salary, and the money trail led to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The final piece of the puzzle was Scarlett Dubois. Gabriel's team found that she wasn't just a random ambitious analyst. Her university tuition had been paid for by an anonymous scholarship fund. A fund that Gabriel, through painstaking digital forensics, traced back to the same Cayman Islands holding company that was financing Marcus Thorne. "He's been cultivating her for years," Isabella breathed, staring at the interconnected lines she had drawn on a whiteboard. She was his asset. He placed her inside the company, probably instructed her to get close to Richard, knowing Richard's weakness for a pretty face and a bit of ego stroking. "It's a classic intelligence operation," Gabriel stated. "Thorne is the handler, Dubois is the honey trap." The full horrifying picture began to emerge. This was Marcus Thorne's endgame. He wasn't Richard's friend. He was his nemesis, playing a long, patient game of revenge and ambition. "So here's the play," Leo said, pacing the room, piecing it together. "Marcus plants the Trojan horse in the merger data. He knows it will eventually cripple the new company, but that's not enough. He wants to take over. He needs to discredit the Sterling leadership, namely Richard, and cause a crisis that sends the stock price plummeting." "The affair," Isabella finished, her voice laced with ice. "It was the perfect catalyst. He goads Richard, who is already a willing fool, into a situation he knows Richard can't resist. He makes sure it happens at the most public, most damaging time possible. He wanted me to find them. He wanted the public explosion. It wasn't just about stopping the merger. It was about cratering Sterling Holdings' value." "So he could trigger a hostile takeover," Anya added. "With the stock in freefall, the company would be vulnerable. He and his backers, whoever is behind that Cayman account, could swoop in and buy up a controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. He gets his revenge on the Sterlings. He gets the company, and he gets to be the hero who rescues it from the ashes." Leo summarized, shaking his head in disbelief at the sheer Machiavellian audacity of the plan. It was all there. The cheating scandal wasn't the story. It was the cover. Isabella's public humiliation had been a meticulously planned strategic move in a corporate coup. The realization didn't lessen her pain, but it transformed it. The grief of a victim was replaced by the cold, calculating rage of a queen who had been used as a pawn in a commoner's coup. "Richard," Isabella said the name, testing it. "Where does he fit? Is he a total idiot, or was he a willing participant?" "I think he's a fool, not a conspirator," Leo reasoned. "Marcus likely sold him a different story. Sow some wild oats before you settle down. Have one last fling." He played on Richard's ego and insecurities. Richard thought he was just being a playboy. He had no idea he was the sacrificial lamb. Isabella stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. They seemed sharper now, colder. She had been betrayed on a level she could scarcely comprehend. Her heart had been broken to create a market opportunity. "They underestimated me," she said, softly, her reflection staring back at her from the dark glass. "They all did. Richard thought I was just a prize. Victoria thought I was an asset. And Marcus thought I was a hysterical woman who would just cry and cancel a wedding." She turned back to the room, her eyes burning with a new fire. He's right about one thing. I did cancel the wedding. Now I'm going to cancel his entire future." She looked at Leo, at Anya, at Gabriel. "We have the proof of the financial fraud. We have the connection between Marcus and Scarlett. We have the motive. It's time to stop playing defense. It's time to show them what a Rossi does when you threaten our family and our house." The serpent had played his game, but he had made a fatal error. He had attacked the lioness in her own den, and he had forgotten that she had claws of her own. The war for Sterling Holdings was about to enter a new bloody chapter, and Isabella Rossi, the scorned bride, was about to become its unlikely conqueror. Isabella did not move with the speed of a woman seeking vengeance. She moved with the cold, deliberate precision of a master chess player setting up a checkmate. For a week, she did nothing, letting the public narrative solidify. Sterling Holdings continued its slow-motion collapse. The stock had stabilized but was still down almost 30% from its pre-wedding value. Board members were in open revolt, and Victoria Sterling was fighting a losing battle to maintain control her every move, hampered by the public disgrace of her son. Marcus Thorne, meanwhile, was playing his part perfectly. He was the picture of loyalty, publicly defending the Sterling family, while privately telling key investors and board members that Richard was an unstable liability, and Victoria had lost her touch. He was positioning himself as the only viable successor, the steady hand needed to guide the company through the storm he had created. The first move of Isabella's counterattack was silent and devastating. Through a neutral third-party law firm based in Geneva, Leo, acting on Isabella's instructions, forwarded Anya Sharma's entire forensic report on the Trojan Horse data breach to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. The report was submitted anonymously, flagged as a whistleblower complaint originating from within Sterling Holdings itself. It detailed the attempted fraud, the ghost protocols, and the potential for massive shareholder deception without once mentioning the Rossi family. 2 days later, federal agents walked into the Sterling Holdings headquarters in Midtown with a warrant. They seized servers, computers, and files. The raid made national news, sending a fresh shockwave of panic through the investment community. The stock, which had been limping, now nosedived into a catastrophic freefall. The narrative was no longer about a cheating fiancé. It was about systemic, high-level corporate fraud. Victoria and Richard were blindsided. They had been so focused on the personal scandal that they had no idea a financial guillotine was hanging over their heads. Isabella's second move was targeted at Marcus Thorne himself. While the federal investigation paralyzed the company, Gabriel delivered a dossier to her. It contained irrefutable proof of the offshore account, the payments to Scarlett Dubois, and the crown jewel, a secretly recorded audio file. Gabriel's team had managed to recover a conversation between Marcus and one of his co-conspirators, a disgruntled board member from a cloud backup. In the recording, Marcus laid out his entire plan. The sabotage of the merger, the use of the affair to spook the filly, his disgusting term for Isabella, and his strategy to trigger a hostile takeover using funds from their Cayman Islands entity. Isabella didn't leak the audio. That would be too simple, too chaotic. She decided to deliver the blow herself. She requested a meeting with the Sterling Holdings Board of Directors. The request, coming from the woman at the center of their company's downfall, was met with stunned confusion. But her family was still a major player in the global market, and refusing her would look weak. They agreed, holding the meeting in their cavernous, wood-paneled boardroom, the very heart of the Sterling Empire. Isabella walked into that room, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. She was dressed in a sharply tailored crimson suit, the color of power and blood. She was visibly pregnant, a silent testament to the personal cost of the drama, but her demeanor was pure steel. Leo was by her side, his presence a silent warning. Victoria Richard and the entire board, including a smug-looking Marcus Thorne, were seated around the massive table. Victoria's face was a mask of cold fury. Richard couldn't even look at her. He stared at the table, a broken man. "Thank you for seeing me." Isabella began, her voice calm and clear, filling the tense silence. "I know my presence here is unexpected. I am not here to relitigate the personal events of the past few weeks. I am here to talk about the future of this company." "You have no right to be here," Victoria snapped. "You have done enough damage." "On the contrary," Isabella replied, her eyes locking with Victoria's. "I am here because I am the only person in this room who knows the full truth of why your company is burning to the ground, and it has very little to do with my cancelled wedding." She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose smug expression was beginning to falter, replaced by a flicker of alarm. "For weeks you have all been operating under the assumption that this crisis was caused by a personal indiscretion. You are wrong. The affair was merely a tool, a brightly colored flag waved to distract the bull while the matador prepared the killing blow." She nodded to Leo, who placed a small, sleek speaker on the center of the table. "I believe you all know Marcus Thorne," Isabella said, her voice dropping. "You see him as Richard's loyal right hand, the future of this company, perhaps. But I'd like to introduce you to the real Marcus Thorne." She pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the boardroom, arrogant and chillingly clear. "The beauty of it is the simplicity. We let pretty boy Richard hang himself with his own zipper. The girl Scarlett played her part perfectly. The pregnant fiancés, the filly spooks, just like I said she would. She cancels everything, makes a big dramatic scene. The stock tanks on the personal drama. Then while they're all running around putting out that fire, the feds get the anonymous tip about the merger data. By the time they figure out what's really going on, we've already bought up 30% of the stock from the Caymans. We rescue the company. I take the throne. The Sterlings are history." The silence that followed the recording was heavier than a tombstone. Every eye in the room turned to Marcus Thorne. His face was the color of ash. He half rose from his chair, sputtering, trying to form a denial, but no words came. He was utterly, completely exposed. Victoria Sterling looked as if she had been turned to stone. The betrayal from her son was one thing, but this was a viper she had nurtured in her own nest, a man who had plotted the utter destruction of her life's work, while smiling to her face. Isabella pressed a second button, and an email was sent simultaneously to everyone in the room. "That is the audio file. You will also now have a full dossier detailing Mr. Thorne's offshore accounts, his conspiracy with certain members of this board, and his long-term cultivation of Scarlett Dubois as a corporate espionage asset. I have taken the liberty of forwarding this entire package to the lead investigator at the SEC. I believe they will find it very illuminating." Marcus Thorne sank back into his chair. A dead man walking. His career was over. His freedom was next. Isabella finally allowed her gaze to fall upon Richard. He was staring at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic plea for a forgiveness he would never receive. He finally understood that he had not been a player, but a pawn. He had lost everything: his fiancée, his child, his company, his family's respect. Not for a passionate mistake, but as a calculated move in someone else's game. It was a truth more damning than any affair. As of this morning, Isabella announced, her voice ringing with finality, Rossi Lifestyle, through a subsidiary investment fund, has acquired a 28% stake in Sterling Holdings, purchased on the open market at its current distressed value. We are now the single largest shareholder. She let that bombshell settle. She owned them. We will be calling for an emergency shareholder meeting to remove the current board and install new leadership. My brother Leo Rossi will act as interim chairman. We will cooperate fully with the federal investigation. We will rebuild this company based on the Rossi values: integrity, transparency, and strength. She stood up. Her point made her victory absolute. She had not just weathered the storm. She had harnessed its power and used it to conquer her enemies. She walked toward the door, pausing only when she was level with Richard. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with a final dismissive indifference. "You were right about one thing, Richard," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was a meaningless mistake. You are a meaningless man." With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of the Sterling dynasty. She stepped out into the bright Manhattan sunshine, took a deep breath of the free air, and placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked a steady, strong rhythm. It was a new world, a new future. One she had secured not as a bride, but as a warrior. A queen who had faced down betrayal and built an empire from the ashes. And so the fairy tale wedding ended not with a kiss, but with a hostile takeover. Isabella Rossi walked away from the wreckage, not as a heartbroken victim, but as a triumphant queen who had turned the deepest betrayal of her life into her greatest victory. She proved that the strongest empires aren't built on contracts and mergers, but on unbreakable integrity and the fierce, unyielding power of a woman determined to protect her own. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating endings are merely the foundation for glorious new beginnings. What would you have done in Isabella's shoes? Could you find the strength to not only walk away, but to fight back and win? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, justice, and ultimate empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening. The silence of a $10 million penthouse is a special kind of empty. For Annalise Sterling, it was a cavern of glittering ice. That night, the only sound was the ragged, painful breathing of her 6-month-old son, Derek, and the echo of her husband's parting words. He had stood by the door, dressed in a Tom Ford suit that cost more than her parents' car. His handsome face marred by impatience. She had begged him not to go, not tonight. "He's burning up, Adrian," she'd pleaded. He just adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes as cold as the marble under her feet. "It's just a baby, you'll be fine," he'd said, dismissing her terror, dismissing their son. Then he left the door clicking shut on his way to his mistress, leaving Annalise alone in their gilded cage with a sick child and a shattered heart. She thought that was the worst night of her life. She was wrong. The next morning his boss called and the real nightmare began. Annalise once believed she was living a fairy tale. She'd met Adrian Sterling at a charity gala, a whirlwind romance that felt ripped from the pages of a magazine. He was the golden boy of Sterling and Davenport capital, a rising star in New York's cutthroat world of finance. He was charming, ambitious, and devastatingly handsome. He'd pursued her with a single-minded intensity that left her breathless. He loved her intelligence, he said her sharp wit, her quiet strength. He'd convinced her to put her own promising career in forensic accounting on hold. "I'll build an empire for us, Annalise," he'd whispered against her hair. "You just have to be by my side." And for a while it was perfect. The sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, the couture gowns, the trips to St. Bart's on a private jet. It was a life of impossible privilege. When their son Derek was born, Annalise thought her world was complete. She had the perfect husband, the perfect baby, the perfect life. But perfection, she was learning, was a fragile veneer. The cracks had started to show slowly. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The business trips extended without explanation. A new scent, a cloying, sweet perfume that wasn't hers, clung to his shirts. When she gently questioned him, he'd turned it back on her. It was the stress of the Davenport acquisition, a massive career-defining deal he was spearheading. He accused her of being needy, of not understanding the pressure he was under. He made her feel small, her concerns petty. Tonight, the veneer hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. Derek had been fussy all day, his usual happy gurgles replaced by weak, painful cries. By evening, his temperature was climbing. Annalise had called the pediatrician, who advised a lukewarm bath and careful monitoring, warning her to go to the emergency room if his fever surpassed 40 degrees Celsius. Fear, cold and sharp, had coiled in her gut. She was a new mother, and the responsibility felt immense, terrifying. Adrian had come home just after 8, striding into the apartment, already shrugging out of his work jacket and into a fresh one for his evening out. "You can't go," Annalise had said, her voice trembling slightly. She held Derek close, his small body radiating a frightening heat against her chest. "He's sick, Adrian. Really sick. His fever is 103. Adrian barely glanced at them. He was texting, a small, self-satisfied smirk on his face. She knew who he was texting. Chloe, the impossibly young, impossibly blonde junior publicist from a rival firm. Annalise had seen her name flash on his phone more than once. "He'll be fine," Adrian said, his tone dismissive. "Babies get fevers. It's what they do. The doctor said we need to watch him. I'm scared. What if it gets worse? I need you here." Her plea was raw, stripped of all pride. He finally looked at her, and his expression was one of genuine annoyance. It was the look of a man whose evening plans were being threatened by a trivial inconvenience. "Annalise, don't be so dramatic. I have an important dinner. It's for the acquisition." "It's business." "Business," she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Your business is named Chloe, isn't it?" His face hardened. The mask of the charming husband fell away, revealing the cold, ruthless man beneath. "My business is none of your concern. Your job is to handle this." He gestured vaguely towards the whimpering baby in her arms. "It's just a baby. You'll be fine." The words hit her harder than a physical blow. It's just a baby. Her entire world, the tiny, perfect human she had created, reduced to an inconvenience. "You'll be fine." An order, not an assurance. "Please, Adrian," she whispered one last time, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't leave me alone tonight." He didn't respond. He simply walked to the door, opened it, and left. The heavy, sound-proofed door clicked shut, sealing her inside the silent, opulent prison he had built for her. The silence was deafening, broken only by Derek's labored breaths. Annalise sank onto the plush white sofa, pulling her sick child tighter, and for the first time in her marriage, she felt a profound, bottomless hatred for the man she had promised to love forever. She was alone, and the long, terrifying night was just beginning. The hours after Adrian left bled into a nightmarish crawl. The sprawling penthouse, usually a symbol of success and security, felt like a vacant museum. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist into a menacing shape. Annalise's world shrank to the small, hot body in her arms, the digital display of the thermometer, and the frantic pounding of her own heart. She gave Derek the lukewarm bath as the pediatrician had instructed. He cried weakly, his little limbs limp in the water. She dried him gently with a soft towel, dressed him in a light onesie, and tried to get him to take some formula, but he refused, turning his head away with a pained whimper. His fever was holding steady at 103.5 degrees Celsius. Around midnight, a wave of pure panic washed over her. What if she was missing something? What if this wasn't just a simple fever? Her mind, usually so sharp and analytical from her accounting days, was a fog of exhaustion and fear. She tried calling Adrian. The first time it rang and rang before going to voicemail. "You've reached Adrian Sterling. I'm unavailable right now, but your call is important to me. Leave a message." A lie. Her call was clearly not important to him. She tried again 10 minutes later. This time it went straight to voicemail. He had either turned his phone off or blocked her number. The realization was a fresh stab of pain. He was with Chloe, laughing, drinking, wrapped up in a world where she and their sick son didn't exist. She imagined them at a chic Soho restaurant, his hand on her back, his charming smile deployed for someone else. The image fueled a cold, hard anger that began to solidify over her fear. At 2:15 a.m., the nightmare intensified. Derek let out a sharp, piercing cry that jolted Annalise from a half-doze on the nursery floor. She scrambled to his crib. He was shaking, his eyes rolled back slightly, his small body convulsing. A febrile seizure. The pediatrician had mentioned it as a possibility, a rare but terrifying side effect of a rapidly spiking fever. "Oh God, no, no, no!" Annalise chanted, scooping him up. His body was stiff, his back arched. It only lasted for 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it was over, he went limp in her arms, his breathing shallow, his face pale. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the diaper bag, her purse, and her keys, wrapping Derek in the thickest blanket she could find. She didn't even bother changing out of her tear-stained silk pajamas. As she rushed through the living room, she fumbled for her phone to call an Uber, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock the screen. Her gaze fell on Adrian's home office, the door slightly ajar. A single lamp was on, illuminating the mess on his mahogany desk. For a fleeting second, she felt a surge of rage so potent it almost buckled her knees. He was out with his mistress while his son had a seizure. The injustice of it was a physical weight. Her eyes caught on a stack of papers near his laptop. On top was a file labeled Davenport Akiak, Project Nightingale. Nightingale. It sounded so delicate, so innocent. Beneath it, she saw ledgers and bank statements for a holding company she'd never heard of, Nightingale Holdings, LLC. In her pre-marriage life, she'd spent years untangling corporate structures just like this. Even in her panicked state, her old instincts flared. Something felt off. But there was no time. Derek whimpered again, a sound that snapped her back to the horrifying present. She raced out of the apartment, the Uber waiting downstairs. The ride to Lenox Hill Hospital was a blur of city lights and silent prayers. At the emergency room, she was a frantic pajama-clad mother clutching her pale son. The nurses and doctors were swift and professional, whisking Derek away to a pediatric bay. They asked for his father's contact information. "He's unavailable." Annalise said the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. For the next 4 hours, she sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital, a lone figure in a sea of other people's private emergencies. They stabilized. Derek brought his fever down with medication and assured her that febrile seizures, while terrifying, were often not as dangerous as they looked. He would need to be observed for the rest of the night, as the first grey hints of dawn broke over the city. Annalise sat by Derek's hospital crib, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in 12 hours. The fear had subsided, replaced by an exhaustion so deep it felt bone-marrow deep. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, something new and unyielding. It was a cold, quiet resolve. The love she'd had for Adrian, eroded over months of neglect, had been burned away completely in the crucible of this one night. She looked at her beautiful, vulnerable son, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would never ever depend on his father for anything again. The fairy tale was over. The cage was unlocked, and she was about to walk out. Dawn in a hospital is a sterile, hopeful thing. The sky outside the window shifted from bruised purple to a soft, promising grey. Derek was finally sleeping soundly, his temperature a stable 99.5 degrees. A nurse had brought Annalise a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, but she cradled it in her hands as if it were a lifeline. The adrenaline from the night had worn off, leaving behind a hollowed-out calm. She had survived. More importantly, Derek had. She checked her phone. Still no messages from Adrian. Not a single missed call. It was almost 7:30 a.m. He was likely still asleep, probably in Chloe's bed, oblivious to the terror his family had endured. The thought didn't even spark anger anymore, just a profound, empty disappointment. It was confirmation of a truth she had long tried to deny. She was utterly alone in her marriage. She scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over her lawyer's name. It was time. There was nothing left to salvage. She was composing a text message, the words, "I need to file for divorce," stark on the screen, when her phone began to ring. The screen lit up with a name she didn't expect, Arthur Davenport. Arthur Davenport was the senior partner of Sterling and Davenport Capital. He was a legend on Wall Street, an old-money patriarch in his late 60s, with a reputation for ruthless business acumen and unshakable personal integrity. Annalise had only met him a few times at formal company events. He was always polite, but distant, his piercing blue eyes seeming to see more than you wanted them to. He was Adrian's boss, his mentor. Why would he be calling her personal cell phone at 7:30 in the morning? Her first thought was that something had happened to Adrian, an accident. A part of her, a vestige of the woman who had once loved him, felt a flicker of alarm. She answered, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. "Hello, Annalise. It's Arthur Davenport. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." His voice was deep and grave, exactly as she remembered it, but there was an undercurrent of urgency that set her on edge. "Mr. Davenport. No, it's all right. Is everything okay? Is Adrian with you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. No, he is not. And that's part of the reason I'm calling. I was trying to reach him all night. His phone is off. Do you happen to know where he is? The question was a loaded one. Annalise's mind raced. Should she cover for him? The instinct born of years of being a supportive wife was to say he was tied up to protect their image. But the image was a lie, and she was done upholding it. She took a breath, the cold hospital air steadying her. No, Mr. Davenport, I don't. He told me he had an important business dinner last night and left around 8:30 p.m. I haven't heard from him since. She chose her words carefully, omitting the part about Chloe, sticking only to the indisputable facts. Another pause longer this time. She could hear the faint sound of papers rustling. A business dinner. Mr. Davenport repeated his tone, laced with something she couldn't quite decipher. Disbelief. Annalise, there was no company dinner last night. The final signing for the acquisition isn't until tomorrow morning. Last night was the last chance for final due diligence. Adrian was supposed to be in the office running the final numbers. He's missed a critical deadline. Annalise's blood ran cold. He hadn't just lied to her about being with Chloe. He had lied about his work, jeopardizing the biggest deal of his career. The deal he'd used as an excuse for his neglect for months. I didn't know, she stammered, feeling a strange sense of vertigo. I'm aware of that, Mr. Davenport said, and his voice softened slightly, becoming almost paternal. Annalise, the reason I'm calling you is not just to find my errant senior VP. I'm calling because I believe you may be in a position to help me with a delicate corporate matter. A matter that involves your husband directly. Her mind flashed back to the file on Adrian's desk. Project Nightingale, the strange holding company. The pieces started to click together in her head, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Her training dormant for years kicked in. Shell corporations missed deadlines, a boss calling the wife. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was something much bigger, much more dangerous. What kind of matter, she asked, her voice now steady, the fatigue replaced by a sharp, focused alertness. It's not something I can discuss over the phone, he replied. I know this is highly unusual, but would it be possible for you to meet with me this morning, as soon as possible? My car can be wherever you are in 20 minutes. She looked at Derek, sleeping peacefully in his little hospital bed. He was safe now. He was her priority. But protecting him also meant securing their future, a future that was now inextricably linked to whatever Adrian had done. She had to know. I'm at Lenox Hill Hospital with my son, she said, her voice firm. But he's stable. Give me an hour. Send the car. Where are we meeting? Not the office, he said quickly. Too many eyes and ears. There's a private suite at the Carlisle. I'll text you the details. Annalise, thank you. You might be the only person who can help untangle this. He hung up. Annalise stared at her phone, the screen dark. Her world had tilted on its axis. Last night she was a wronged wife, a scared mother. This morning she was something else entirely. She was a woman with a choice, standing at the precipice of a conspiracy she was just beginning to understand. The call wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The Carlisle Hotel was an icon of discreet old-world luxury, a world away from the sterile reality of the hospital. A black town car sent by Mr. Davenport had whisked her from Lenox Hill to the hotel's private entrance. She had managed to convince a kind nurse to watch over Derek for a couple of hours, promising to be back before he even woke up, dressed in borrowed scrubs from the hospital's supply closet. The only clean clothes available, she felt utterly out of place, walking across the marble lobby. Arthur Davenport was waiting for her in a penthouse suite that overlooked the park, the same view as her own apartment, but from a different, more somber angle. He wasn't the intimidating corporate titan she remembered. He was a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was dressed in a simple grey suit, his tie loosened, and he greeted her not with a handshake, but with a concerned look. "Annalise, thank you for coming. Please sit. Can I get you anything?" "Coffee, tea." "Hadi, coffee would be wonderful." "Thank you," she said, sinking into an armchair that was probably worth more than her entire college tuition. He poured her a cup himself, his movements slow and deliberate. First he said, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. "How is your son?" The genuine concern in his voice almost undid her. "He's fine. He will be fine. It was a febrile seizure, but the doctors say he's recovered well." Davenport nodded, a grim look on his face. "I am truly sorry you had to go through that alone. Adrian should have been there." It wasn't an accusation, but a simple statement of fact. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment before getting to the point. He opened a leather-bound folder on the coffee table between them. "Annalise, when we brought Adrian on as a partner track VP, we did a thorough background check. On him and on you." Annalise stiffened. "On me?" "Of course," he said, calmly. "The spouse of a key executive is part of the package. We need to know there are no liabilities. Your file was frankly more impressive than his. First in your class at Wharton, a rising star at Deloitte in their forensic accounting division. You uncovered the medtech fraud scheme of 2018. The partners there were devastated when you left." She stared at him, stunned. Adrian had always downplayed her past career, framing it as a little job she had before she met him and her real life began. He had made her feel as if she'd been a competent but unremarkable analyst. To hear her accomplishments laid out so plainly by a man like Arthur Davenport was jarring. I gave that up," she said quietly. "For my family." "I know," Davenport said, his gaze unwavering. "And Adrian knew exactly what he was convincing you to give up. He didn't marry a beautiful socialite, Annalise. He married one of the sharpest financial minds I've ever seen on paper. And I believe he's been using that fact against you." He pushed a document across the table. It was a flowchart of interconnected companies. At the center was the Davenport acquisition, their main target. Branching off it were several smaller entities, and there at the bottom was a name that made her breath catch in her throat: Nightingale Holdings, LLC. Project Nightingale, as Adrian so poetically named it, is a ghost. Davenport explained, his voice low and intense. It's a shell corporation he set up 6 months ago, registered in Delaware, with further ties to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He's been using the acquisition as cover. Over the last few months, he has systematically siphoned nearly $15 million from our firm. Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. Embezzlement. It was so much worse than she had imagined. How she whispered, her analytical mind already tracing the potential pathways. By creating fraudulent invoices for consulting services and due diligence expenses related to the acquisition, Davenport continued, the invoices are submitted by Nightingale Holdings and paid out by our accounts department. Adrian is the one who approves the payments. He's been cooking the books, burying the expenses within the multi-billion-dollar transaction, hoping no one would notice a few million here and there. But the audit trail... Annalise began, her old instincts taking over. Someone would eventually find it. Exactly, Davenport said, leaning forward. And he has a plan for that, too. He's fabricated a digital trail to frame a junior analyst in his department, a young man named Kevin Lynn. All the transfers from a technical standpoint appear to originate from Kevin's workstation. Adrian's plan, we believe, was to let the acquisition close tomorrow, then disappear. By the time our quarterly audit uncovered the discrepancy, he'd be long gone, and an innocent kid would take the fall. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just a cheater and a liar. He was a predator. "Why are you telling me this?" Annalise asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because he got sloppy." Davenport said, a flicker of anger in his eyes. Last night was his last chance to clean the slate to finalize the falsified records before the deal closed. But he wasn't in the office. He was, as you know, otherwise engaged. He left his work computer on, logged into the network. Our IT security flagged an unusual remote login attempt to his files early this morning from an unauthorized IP address. My CIO woke me up at 4 a.m. We started digging. What we've found is damning, but it's incomplete. The final piece of the puzzle, the physical ledger that connects Nightingale Holdings directly to him and his offshore accounts, is not in his office. He paused, his gaze locking with hers. We believe it's in his home office, in your apartment. Annalise's mind flashed again to the desk. The file, the sense that something was wrong. He must have brought it home to work on last night before Chloe's allure proved too strong. The arrogance of it, to leave evidence of a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme lying around his home. "You're the only one who can get it without tipping him off," Davenport stated simply. He's betrayed this company. He's betrayed an innocent employee and Annalise. He has betrayed you and your son in the most profound way possible. I am asking you not as Adrian's wife, but as the brilliant forensic accountant I know you are, to help me stop him. The room was silent. Annalise looked out the window at the city, her city. The life Adrian had given her was a lie funded by theft. The security he promised was a phantom. But her mind, her skills, those were real. He had tried to bury that part of her, but it was still there, sharp and ready. She thought of Derek sleeping in the hospital. She thought of Adrian's cold, dismissive words. "It's just a baby. You'll be fine." She turned back to Arthur Davenport, the last vestiges of the frightened, dependent wife, gone forever. In her eyes was a fire he had not seen before, but had gambled on finding. "Tell me exactly what you need," she said, "and I'll get it for you." Returning to the penthouse was one of the hardest things Annalise had ever done. The black car dropped her back at Lenox Hill, where she spent a precious hour cuddling a now awake and cheerful Derek, his fever gone, his smile returning. The hospital officially discharged him, and Annalise, holding her son, felt a surge of strength. This was for him. The plan she had formulated with Arthur Davenport was simple in its concept, but terrifying in its execution. She was to return to the apartment and act as if nothing was wrong other than being the rightfully upset wife. Her one and only goal was to locate and secure the Nightingale ledger, the physical book of records that would be Adrian's undoing. Davenport's security team had confirmed Adrian's credit card was used at 4 a.m. for a room at the Baccarat Hotel, Chloe's usual haunt. He was still there, likely sleeping off his night of debauchery. This gave Annalise a window. As the elevator ascended to the penthouse, her heart hammered against her ribs. She was no longer just a wife returning home. She was a Trojan horse, an agent of justice walking into the heart of the enemy's camp. She unlocked the door, the familiar click echoing with new meaning. The apartment was pristine, silent, and cold. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off glass and chrome, illuminating a life that was a complete fabrication. She put a sleeping Derek down in his crib, her movements quiet and deliberate. Then she went to Adrian's office. The room was just as she had seen it in her panicked rush hours earlier. The desk was a controlled chaos of files and tech. Her eyes immediately scanned for the ledger. Davenport had described it as a simple black moleskin notebook. Adrian's analog affectation, a place he kept key numbers and transfer codes, believing it was safer than any digital file. It wasn't on the desk. It wasn't on the shelves lined with leather-bound law books he'd never read. She checked the drawers. The first was full of expensive pens and stationery. The second held personal effects, cufflinks, old photos, a spare watch. The third was locked. Of course. Panic began to prickle at the edges of her calm. She didn't have a key. Adrian kept it on his person at all times. She could feel the precious minutes ticking away. She ran her fingers along the edge of the drawer, her mind racing. In her old job, she'd learned that corporate criminals were often undone by simple human arrogance and laziness. Adrian was both in spades. Where would he hide a key? Not somewhere clever. Somewhere convenient. She looked around the office. Her eyes landed on a heavy, ornate silver picture frame on the desk. It held a photo of her and Adrian on their wedding day, smiling blissfully unaware of the future. He loved that photo, seeing it as a testament to his success, the beautiful wife, the perfect life. With a surge of bitter irony, she picked it up. She felt a slight bulge in the velvet backing. She carefully pried the back off. Taped to the inside was a small silver key. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. She pulled the drawer open, and there it was, a plain black moleskin notebook. She opened it. The pages were filled with Adrian's neat, precise handwriting. It was all there. Dates, transfer amounts, codes, and names of offshore banking contacts. Cross-referenced with the digital evidence Davenport's team had, this was the smoking gun. This was the nail in Adrian's multi-million-dollar coffin. She took out her phone and with steady hands photographed every single page, creating a digital backup as Davenport had instructed. Then she tucked the original ledger into the bottom of Derek's diaper bag, hiding it beneath a layer of diapers and baby wipes. No one would ever look there. Just as she slid the empty drawer shut and relocked it, placing the key back in its hiding spot, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze, the chime of the private elevator arriving at their floor. He was back. She hadn't expected him this early. Her window had just slammed shut. She raced out of the office, her mind a whirlwind. She had to appear normal. She smoothed her hair, took a deep, shuddering breath, and tried to compose her face into a mask of weary anger, the face of a wife who had been up all night with a sick child. The apartment door opened, and Adrian walked in. He looked tired, his expensive suit rumpled. He had the gall to be holding a peace offering, a large coffee from her favorite cafe, and a bag of croissants. "Annalise," he began, his voice attempting a tone of gentle contrition. "Look, I know you're angry. I'm so sorry about last night. Things with the deal got out of hand. I should have called." She stared at him, at his handsome, lying face. She thought of Derek's seizure, of her terror in the hospital, of the innocent Kevin Lynn, who was about to have his life ruined. She thought of the ledger hidden not 20 feet away in their son's diaper bag. Out of hand, she repeated her voice, dangerously quiet. "You have no idea. He frowned, his practiced apology faltering in the face of her cold fury. "Come on, honey. Don't be like this. I was working. For us. For our future." He gestured with the coffee. "I brought you breakfast." Annalise let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "You think a croissant fixes this, Adrian? You think you can just walk back in here and fix everything with breakfast?" This was the moment. The plan was for her to leave the apartment with Derek and the bag and meet Davenport's contact downstairs. But Adrian was here now, blocking her path, trying to placate her with pathetic gestures. She had to play her part perfectly. "Where is Derek?" he asked, a flicker of what might have been genuine concern in his eyes. "Is he okay?" "He's fine," she said, her voice like ice. "No thanks to you. We spent the night at Lenox Hill. He had a seizure, Adrian." The color drained from his face. "What a seizure. Why didn't you call me?" "I tried," she said, letting all the bitterness of the night pour into her words. "Your phone was off. You were too busy with your business dinner." He looked genuinely shaken, a crack in his armor of arrogance. "Annalise, I didn't know. I swear, it doesn't matter anymore," she said, walking over to the diaper bag and slinging it over her shoulder. She moved towards the nursery. "I'm taking Derek to my mother's for a few days. I can't even look at you right now." It was the perfect excuse. He would see it as a wife needing space, not as a woman carrying the evidence that would destroy him. "Wait. Annalise, let's just talk about this," he pleaded, following her. She picked up her sleeping son from his crib, the weight of him a comforting anchor in the storm. "There's nothing to talk about, Adrian," she said, turning to face him, her eyes hard as diamonds. "You made your choice last night. Now I'm making mine." She walked past him, heading for the door, the diaper bag containing his doom slung over her shoulder. The fate of millions of dollars of multiple lives was hidden between the diapers and the Desitin, and the architect of the crime had no idea he had just been checkmated. The air in the penthouse was thick with a tension that felt physically suffocating. Adrian, for the first time since she'd known him, looked completely wrong-footed. Her cold fury was something he couldn't charm, bully, or buy his way out of. He saw his control slipping, and it made him desperate. "Don't walk away from me, Annalise," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge as he followed her to the foyer. He moved to block the door. "We are not doing this. You are not taking my son and running off to your mother's." My son. The possessive pronoun after a night of utter abandonment was so audacious it almost made her laugh. Annalise held Derek tighter and faced him down. "Get out of my way, Adrian." "No," he said, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. "You've had your little tantrum. You made your point. I screwed up. I'll buy you a new piece of jewelry. We'll go to Paris. Just stop being so hysterical." It was his fatal mistake. The condescension, the belief that she could be bought, that her legitimate pain was mere hysteria, solidified her resolve into something unbreakable. "It's over, Adrian," she said, her voice chillingly calm. "And not just because of Chloe. Not just because you left your son when he was sick. It's over because of Project Nightingale." The name hit him like a physical blow. All the color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly pale shock. The arrogant posture collapsed, and for a fleeting second she saw pure animal panic in his eyes. What did you just say?" He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Nightingale Holdings, LLC. She continued, pressing her advantage. The fraudulent invoices, the $15 million you siphoned from your own company, the plan to frame Kevin Lynn for your crimes. Did you really think you were smart enough to pull it off? Did you really think I was stupid enough to never find out? He stared at her, his mind clearly racing, trying to figure out how she could possibly know. He glanced frantically toward his office. You went in my office. You went through my things. It wasn't a question. It was a horrified accusation. You left the evidence of your fraud in a house with a forensic accountant. Adrian, she retorted, that's not me being clever. That's you being an arrogant, sloppy fool. His panic began to morph into rage. You have no idea what you're talking about, he snarled, taking a step toward her. You have no proof. Don't I? She said calmly. She adjusted the diaper bag on her shoulder, patting it lightly. It's amazing what you can fit in one of these. Diapers, wipes, a pacifier, and a little black moleskin notebook that details every single illegal transfer you've ever made. His eyes darted to the bag, and then back to her face, a look of complete and utter disbelief dawning. He lunged for the bag. Give me that. Annalise sidestepped him, her heart leaping into her throat. This was the moment she had feared. But just as he reached for her, a sharp, authoritative rap echoed from the front door. Adrian froze. They both stared at the door. Who is that? He hissed, his eyes wide with fear. I imagine Annalise said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her, that it's your boss. And perhaps a few of his friends. On cue, a key turned in the lock, a master override key that only building security and apparently Arthur Davenport had access to. The door swung open. Arthur Davenport stood there, flanked by two stern-looking men in dark suits who were clearly not corporate lawyers. Behind them stood two uniformed NYPD officers. Davenport's eyes fell first on Annalise and a sleeping Derek, his expression softening with relief. Then his gaze shifted to Adrian, and it turned to stone. Adrian Davenport said, his voice booming with cold authority in the silent foyer. Your little project is over. Adrian looked from Davenport to the police officers, his face a mask of crumbling bravado. He was trapped. He turned his desperate, furious gaze back to Annalise. You did this, he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. You, my own wife. You stopped being my husband last night when you walked out that door, Annalise replied, her voice clear and strong. You said, it's just a baby, you'll be fine. Well, Derek is fine. And I am more than fine. I am free. One of the detectives stepped forward. Adrian Sterling, you are under arrest for suspicion of grand larceny, embezzlement, and wire fraud. As the officer began to read him his Miranda rights, Adrian's facade finally shattered completely. The charming millionaire, the Wall Street titan, vanished. In his place was a common criminal, cornered and pathetic. He didn't resist as they cuffed his hands behind his back, his expensive suit now the uniform of a fallen man. They led him out of the apartment, past the marble tables and the priceless art he had acquired with stolen money. His last look was at Annalise, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. It didn't touch her. She felt nothing but a vast, cleansing relief. Arthur Davenport walked over to her. The car is waiting for you downstairs, he said gently. My security will escort you wherever you need to go. You and your son are safe now. Annalise nodded, tears finally welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of release. "Thank you, Arthur." "No, Annalise," he said, looking at her with profound respect. "Thank you. You did the right thing. The brave thing." She looked down at Derek, sleeping peacefully in her arms, completely unaware that his entire world had just been irrevocably changed for the better. She had walked into this apartment, a prisoner. Now she was walking out a survivor, her child in her arms, and the key to her new life hidden in a diaper bag. The gavel fell in the hushed wood-paneled courtroom, the sound echoing with a finality that seemed to shake the dust from the air. 6 months to the day after Adrian had walked out on his family, his fate was sealed. Annalise sat in the back row, a lone figure in a simple navy dress, having slipped in unnoticed after the proceedings began. She hadn't come for revenge or spectacle. She had come for closure, to witness the final definitive end of the life she had escaped. Adrian stood before the judge, a shadow of the man he once was. The impeccable Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His charismatic confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a sallow, bitter resentment. When the judge sentenced him to a term of 7 to 10 years in a federal correctional institution, he didn't flinch. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. But as they led him away, his eyes scanned the gallery and found hers. For a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she married, a desperate, pleading look. But it was immediately swallowed by the now familiar, venomous hatred. Annalise met his gaze without malice, her expression one of serene, sorrowful finality. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the ghost of Adrian Sterling to fade into the annals of courtroom history. Her new life hadn't begun today. It had begun the moment she walked out of that penthouse. The weeks following Adrian's arrest had been a whirlwind of methodical dismantling. She'd hired movers not to pack, but to help her sort. She walked through the cavernous closets, filled with couture gowns and designer shoes, touching the fabrics that had once felt like a costume for a role she was playing. She left them all behind, along with the glittering jewels and extravagant gifts he had used to placate her. They were artifacts of a life that wasn't hers, paid for with stolen money and lies. She packed only her books, Derek's belongings, personal photos from before her marriage, and a few simple outfits. As she stood in the empty living room for the last time, the sunlight glinting off the bare marble floors, she felt not loss, but a profound lightness, as if she had shed a heavy, suffocating skin. She and Derek stayed with her mother in Connecticut for a month. It was a time of healing and quiet rebuilding. Her mother, a practical woman who had always viewed Adrian with a healthy dose of skepticism, didn't say "I told you so." Instead, she simply made tea, held Derek, while Annalise cried the last of her tears, and offered the steady, unspoken support that Annalise desperately needed. "That man built you a palace, honey," her mother had said one evening as they watched the sunset from the back porch. "But he forgot to give you the key. You were always meant to build your own house." The call from Arthur Davenport came during that time, and the job offer felt less like a lifeline and more like a homecoming. Her first day at Sterling and Davenport was daunting. Whispers followed her down the hall. She was the scorned wife, the whistleblower. But that changed the moment she stepped into her first board meeting. Armed with a comprehensive plan to overhaul the company's risk management protocols, she spoke with a clarity and authority that silenced all speculation. She wasn't Adrian Sterling's ex-wife. She was Annalise Thorne. She had taken back her maiden name, a formidable professional with an unparalleled mind for numbers and an unshakable ethical compass. Her greatest satisfaction came from mentoring her new team, especially a young, brilliant analyst named Kevin Lynn. He had been quiet and timid at first, still shaken from being the designated scapegoat in Adrian's scheme. One afternoon, he stopped by her office. "Ms. Thorne," he began, fidgeting with a report. "I just wanted to thank you. You didn't just save my career. You saved my family's reputation, my future. If there is ever anything I can do." Annalise offered him a warm smile. "You're already doing it, Kevin. Your work on the quarterly projections was outstanding. Just keep doing what you're doing. Integrity and hard work are the only currency that matters in the end. Let that be the lesson from all of this." Kevin nodded, a new confidence in his eyes. In helping him, Annalise felt she was actively repairing the damage Adrian had left in his wake, turning his destructive legacy into something positive. Now home was a 3-story brownstone on a leafy street in Park Slope. She'd bought it with the clean money from her divorce settlement and the signing bonus from her new job. It had high ceilings, a small garden out back, and a beautiful bay window in the living room that was perfect for reading stories to an increasingly active Derek. The silence here wasn't the cold, empty silence of the penthouse. It was the warm, peaceful quiet of a home filled with love, punctuated by the happy squeals and babbling of her son, who was now taking his first wobbly steps. Some days, she took the subway to work anonymous in the bustling morning crowd and felt more powerful than she ever had in the back of a chauffeured town car. Her life was her own, every small piece of it earned and cherished. She even saw an article online one day about Chloe, who had attempted to rebrand herself as a wellness influencer. The comments section was a brutal reminder that the internet never forgets, and her career pivot quickly fizzled out. Annalise felt a brief, detached pity for the girl before closing the tab. Chloe was a ghost from a different life, irrelevant to her new reality. This evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Annalise sat on the floor of her living room, stacking blocks with Derek. He clapped his hands in delight as the tower grew, then knocked it down with a gleeful shriek. His laughter was the only music she needed. She thought back to Adrian's cruel, dismissive words that had been the catalyst for her transformation. "It's just a baby, you'll be fine." He had been so spectacularly wrong. Derek wasn't an inconvenience. He was her anchor, her motivation, her North Star. And she wasn't just fine. She was whole. She was happy. She was free. She had faced down the millionaire, the manipulator, the monster who lived in the gilded cage, and had discovered that the key was inside her, all along. Looking at her son, her beautiful, thriving boy, she knew she hadn't just built her own house. She had built her own world. And it was magnificent. And so Annalise Sterling closed the chapter on a life that was built on lies and opened a new one written in her own ink. Her story isn't just about the downfall of a cheating criminal husband. It's a powerful testament to the hidden strength that lies within us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It's a reminder that the most gilded cages are still cages, and that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in integrity, courage, and the freedom to build a life on your own terms. She didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her identity, her career, and her future, proving that the most powerful response to betrayal is to build a better life without the person who broke your heart. What did you think of Annalise's ultimate decision? Was she right to team up with her husband's boss? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of resilience and empowerment, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.